All right, let me try it this way. Well, it's really amazing to be part of this conference, and I've been aware of your institution for most of my life, and it's amazing the work you're doing now, and I think it's just critical. The parts of the discussions I was able to listen to this morning are just central to the critical work that needs to be done today. And um, you are also, you have an important past, and I also sometimes think of it as a glamorous past because it's not just integral studies, but I think just many derivatives. And I think ecopsychology was a derivative of the sort of work that you and other institutions did during the 1960s forward. So I had really wanted to come down and be in your physical building and meet you and spend time with you, and it just wasn't possible. Um, he- Here's where I'm headed in this presentation. I'd like to begin by characterizing two large world problems. The first one has already been uh, spoken of some this morning, and I'll provide a slightly different casting of it. And then I want to suggest solutions to both problems. It's the same solution, and it's reasonably simple. It involves people interacting ever more deeply with nature, and not just with domestic nature, but relatively wild nature. So I think I think most of my talk is really trying to be speaking on the solution side, not the problem side, but I do need to set up the problems. But with the solutions in hand, I'll be suggesting toward the end of the talk that if we do what I'm suggesting, that is, if we are able to rewild through interaction, we'll renew space in our consciousness for, now it's hard to use words, but something like calling it being with a capital B. I think of it as a form of high awareness with no thought. Um, it's um, when you're in that space, and you can be in it for short periods of time, you can be in it for long periods. There's spaciousness, there's stillness, there's aliveness. Uh, we can call it presence, or if we reach into the Vedic tradition, we can call it Sat Chitananda, Sat pure being or pure existence, Chit pure consciousness, and Ananda pure bliss. And the word pure is somehow trying to extract these terms from their world empirical base. So it has a transcendental claim, but I think we can also work simply psychologically. So I think the ideas I'm highlighting, we can either embed them into an ontology or metaphysic, or we can just say, I don't want to go there. Let's situate it within human psychology. The Okay, for two problems. First problem, it's a hard one. It's different ways of characterizing it. I'm referring to it as the domination model. It's widespread. It's a domination of people over people and people over nature. So think of that deep connection. Once there's a domination mindset, it's pervasive, and it's embedded in many cultural and political systems across the world. Sarah, this morning we're speaking about climate psychosis. And in some ways, I was trying to think, well, it's a related way to characterize a version of this problem, or perhaps in some ways it's an outcome of this problem. But all of you, I mean, all of us are, it's like we're in the midst of a tsunami right now in this country, domination. So however we come at that from our respective areas, I think we all understand what we're talking about. The photos I have are from another era because it's just hard to know which ones to pick right now, and it's so visceral. The alternative you've all been central in putting forward. So this is terminology coming out of your work over the years, and it's focused on reciprocity and respect and care in connection with people. And this phrase that is recurrent in today's in the talks today is the more than human world. When it started getting used years ago, it had a novelty to it, and now I think for some of us, it's yes, a key idea. And I think this relationality, it shows up in how we love, how we live. And when I say we, I'm referring not just to humans, but to the larger world of how we love and live, and also how we belong. So, first problem, the domination problem. Um, and the second problem may be less familiar, and it's what I have been referring to as the problem of environmental generational amnesia. And the basic idea here is that all of us construct a conception of what is environmentally normal based on the natural world we encounter in our childhood. The crux is that with each ensuing generation, the amount of environmental degradation increases, but each generation tends to take that as that degraded condition as the non-degraded condition, as in a sense it's normalized. And sometimes it's referred to as the shifting baseline problem. Jared Diamond refers to it as landscape amnesia. There are different distinctions, subtle distinctions between these terms, but I've been calling it environmental generational amnesia. The generational part, I think, is really key. And so when, Sarah, when you were speaking this morning about climate denial, I think EGA offers just an additional way. It's not the only way. What you're highlighting is very important, but I think it's an additional way to explain how it is that denial emerges. And we're talking with someone and it's like, oh my goodness, it's not that just that they don't understand it. There's a way in which experientially they're not experiencing it. So I first started recognizing this problem and writing about it back in 1995. I mean, it was in the early 1990s in an early study I did in Houston, Texas, that I started seeing it. We interviewed children and parents in an inner city, all Black community on their environmental views and values. And some of the things we were finding, and at the time when I think we were going against a stereotype held by many, including those in the Black community, that environmental issues were really a kind of a white middle class sort of thing, and that people in the Black community were not interested in the environment. And many in the community disagreed with that, but it's also a stereotype, for example, that was held by the principal of the school. So from this early data, we're trying to address what was then, I think, a misconception. From our data, children were aware of environmental problems such as air pollution and water pollution. They discuss environmental issues with their family. They valued aspects of nature, such as plants, parks, and open spaces. And they brought forward moral reasoning about nature. And it's of two forms that I was then starting to articulate. And I started moving these studies forward in other developmental studies and cross-cultural studies, including in Portugal and the Brazilian Amazon. So very broadly, anthropocentric reasoning, moral reasoning, focuses on how protecting the environment affects us. So a child from the inner city of Houston said it's wrong to pollute the air because air pollution goes by and people get sick, and it really bothers me because that could be another person's life. Um, it's I think I think it's a very important perspective. There may be, and I think there are limitations of anthropocentric reasoning, but if we don't take it seriously, I don't think we're understanding the development of how one moves from an anthropocentric to what I'm now referring to as a biocentric perspective, which often has one of two types of reasoning. One is that people speak of and frame it in terms of intrinsic value of nature, and others in terms of the rights of nature, and the two, of course, are connected. For example, this is a fifth grade child in the inner city of Houston saying it's not our right to kill fish because fishes, they want to live freely, just like we live freely. And so in a sense, you can see there's an isomorphism. What we want, need, desire is accorded the same to the animals, fish, and they have to live in freedom. They need the same respect that we need. Now, in that study, we asked children if they knew about such environmental problems as air pollution and water pollution, and most did and could describe it. And then we asked if Houston had such problems. And this was the surprise, just kind of blew me away, is that a significant number of children who were able to tell us about air pollution and water pollution, they would say that Houston didn't have these problems. And at the time, I'm just so baffled because I would wake up in the morning in Houston. Houston at the time was the most polluted city in the United States. So I would wake up and the oil refinery smells very intense. Breathing was hard to breathe. And of course, visually, you couldn't see. So seeing, breathing, and smell strongly impacted. How could these kids not know? And I think one answer builds from this constructivist psychological account I'm drawing here on Jean Piaget's long legacy of work in constructivist psychology and the construction of knowledge. Children, the explanation I was putting forward is that children were born in Houston and most had never left it. And so they constructed their baseline for what they thought was a normal environment, which included that level of existing pollution. And, occasionally, anecdotally, if they did speak about pollution, they would say, oh, well, a big bus, one of the diesel buses comes by, like, okay, and the diesel fumes, that's pollution. But, and that's the basis they have for comparison. So over the years, there's been continuing evidence for environmental generational amnesia, the EGA. Researchers, including myself, have continued to document EGA across different countries, populations, and methods. I think the pattern is robust and reoccurring. Again, it's that each generation constructs a baseline for what is normal based on increasingly degraded environmental conditions. Now, this is climate. This is anxiety for me because it's like it's hard enough to solve problems when we can agree that there's a problem, and when people are not recognizing there's this huge problem, it's like what are we going to do? And so yeah, there's a lot of anxiety over the years for me as I I've approached this and talked with people on it, and some people respond to me and say, Peter, you just need to relax. Things are going to be okay. And the discussions go in different ways, but kind of if I was to summarize it, it's some form of this, which is, well, listen, adaptation is how we evolved. And I do think EGA is a form of adaptation. And so, yeah, adaptation is how we evolved. And I agree with that. And it's part of our evolutionary history is our phylogeny and go back to Paleolithic era to Neolithic. I mean, who we are. I mean, E.O. Wilson speaks about this in biophilia, and it's just real, it's adaptation. I get it. And there is a sense, and EGA is a part of this, that will adapt to environmental degradation into cities of 20 to 30 million people in intensely dense areas. The issue is that the final thing that they say that they think I can relax with is that adaptation is good for us. That's how we evolved. We are adapting, and adaptation is good. So everything's okay. And in some sense, this is a form of the naturalistic fallacy of thinking of what is our evolutionary history. Can we get a normative judgment of what's good for us? And if we just think of like adaptation, it's like if we were all put in a prison cell like this and say, okay, you know, live there for a year or 5 years, 50 years, our entire lives, if our entire, yes, we would adapt. Of course, a few of us, a few of you might die. You might say, no, I can't live that way. You just shut down so much that you die. Most of us would adapt somehow. But in that process of adapting, we know that it's like maybe we get hugely angry and lash out, very violent. Maybe opposite, we just completely shut down and go numb, or some combination. Maybe this is the psychosis, you're highlighting earlier today. We would get probably many of us would get physically sick. A lot of illnesses would arise, and um, and it's not just us, of course. And Vaughn was highlighting this in his talk, Elephants, and he's drawing on Gabe Bradfield's just hugely important research on the PTSD of elephants, and elephants adapt in captivity. So that's the adaptation move. Sure, of some of them can die, but many somehow survive. But are they thriving as elephants? And that's I don't even know why I even asked it rhetorically. Maybe just to soften the trauma of thinking of what their lives are. But when you read Gay's work on elephants, there's no softening that she does. She just names it, and that's even in yeah, it's just very, very hard. So the move I'm making is one that Vaughn also was central to your talk, Vaughn, is the people in captivity. And then the question that you were asking, I'm asking, is are we thriving as people? And again, I'm asking it rhetorically. And we can put some metrics to it. For those of us in the United States, how are we doing in terms of our physical health and mental well-being? So here are some numbers. And 66% of us are overweight, 33% of us are obese, 8% have asthma, 9% diabetes. There's no moral judgment here I'm making. I'm just like trying to like describe the condition that we're in. And I think this is some of what Paul Shepard and in his legacy is such important work in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, his life legacy of just saying this is insane. If you show me a society with this level of illness, there's that's his book, Nature and Madness. So part of the nature and health field that I'm also part of, and the National Nature and Health Alliance, is we're having a conference in Houston later this month. It's interaction with nature leads to substantial benefits to our physical health and psychological health. This was a paper I was part of, led by Howie Fremkin, that's been quite influential in putting some of the ideas forward. And you can just read some of these major benefits. Maybe 20 years ago when we were trying to bring these ideas forward, a lot of the pushback was we were well-intentioned scientists, but way ahead with the data, and we needed to back up. And that drove me crazy. It was kind of like climate change data and people saying the data for decades, people are saying there's not enough data. And at what point is there enough data? It's not a data issue. So I was frustrated then, but now 20 years later, it's like there are many, many thousands of studies that are supporting this broad proposition about nature being so important for us. And maybe we can come back to this in the discussion period if you want. I think I think Vaughn took issue with I'm not crazy about the phase Ecopsychology 1, 2, and next version, and the critique of nature and health. And the scientific study of this, I'm not keen on characterizing that as misguided. I think it's very important. I think if we don't take this seriously, it's not a way out of this mess. But at the same time, that in itself will not get us out of this mess. And I think that's what Vaughn and others are trying to say when they are critiquing it. It's still a use model in some ways, and fundamentally, that's not enough. So maybe my answer to Vaughn's question is, what does stage 3 do? Is it tries to integrate this science and us as a technological selves as with early ecopsychology or integral studies. And for me, as part of the Journal of Ecopsychology, I've been the editor for 12 years. That's the vision I set up 12 years ago. And maybe a little frustration on my part that it's been really hard to build community. Um, uh, with a larger umbrella of there's room for lots of good and important work to happen, and we don't have to be fighting over of different segments. But we can come back to that later. But I just wanted to have raise this as part of the dialogue that's being engendered right now in this conference. So the question then I'm really wanting to move into for this talk is, in today's urban technological world, how can we reconnect people with nature? And I'm looking for solutions. And once I've started feeling the problems and I was trying to answer the problems through like better arguments or philosophy or, like and at some point I'm just thinking, there's something deeper here, and that's almost me going back to my Piagetian roots of interaction. Interaction is the mechanism for development, and interaction leads to disequilibration, which then allows for a restructuring of thought and affect. So, if I ask it just in a really specific way here, is, well, how would you teach a child to swim? And it's like, well, we know this. It's just, yeah, you could lecture somebody on dry land. Let me tell you about you could uh, do physiology of swimming too. You could show videos. And at some point, we all know, well, you have to get her in the water. And um, so how do you teach people about nature if you're trying to work on this, what I'm calling the generational amnesia that we all face? How do you teach someone that? And I think one answer emphasizes the importance of people interacting with nature. Um, Now, I remember talking with an architect who on this idea of environmental generational amnesia, he understood it and he said, "Oh my goodness, it's like my my child the other day, I was driving with him and he said, Dad, look at the forest." And the dad's going, "Whoa, I'm in downtown Seattle. Like, what do you mean forest?" And he's looking and he sees the small trees planted on the side of the street, and the son's calling that a forest. And it's like, so he's saying that's an example, right, of environmental generational amnesia. I'm saying, yes, that is. And then he says, and he says, but of course I know what a forest is. And he points to an area just outside of Seattle that's been logged many, many times, and it's a state park now, and it's very lovely and trails through it. And he's saying that's a forest. And I couldn't even raise it to him that that's the problem, that he himself is a product of environmental generational amnesia. He himself has not been in old growth forests. If he's been in old growth, he would know that the state park he's referring to is just a poor resemblance of what forest can be. That's the problem, is then that the interaction has to be not simply with nature and not simply with domestic nature, but with slightly more wild forms of nature. That's in a nutshell. That's I think that's one of the main parts of my talk today. So you look at this child and you just say, wow, okay, might he have a deep connection to the ocean for the rest of his life? And if it happens, and it often does, it's developed through interaction. So in the last 15 years, I've been trying to work this idea of interaction, because because there's a problem if you just say, well, just go out into nature then and interact. It's like people say, I don't know what to do. And this happens all the time. Parents are told, get your kids out into nature. I go, what do I do? And what does that mean? Especially as our experiences get increasingly diminished. So I'd like to, in this next section of my presentation, talk about what I've been developing, and my colleagues and students, and it's what we refer to as an interaction pattern approach. And then after that, I'll suggest that this approach can help address the two overarching world problems that I started with today. That is the domination model and the EGA problem of EGA. So in a very formal way, I'll move past this very quickly, but just so you have some sort of definition, these patterns refer to forms of human interaction with nature, characterized by enough specificity to establish meaningful units and enough generality to allow for many different instantiations. In effect, infinite number of instantiations of the interaction being enacted. So I'm looking for specificity and generality all at the same time. And many of these patterns presumably emerged during the course of our evolutionary history. So they're like deep in the architecture of the human body and mind. I was inspired by Christopher Alexander's design patterns. He did this in architecture over a decade or two. And here's one of the patterns I love: windows on two sides of a room versus one side or no. But if you find you're in an environment and you see, like, oh my goodness, there's something hospitable here that draws you. It's all, you can often say, oh, the pattern. It doesn't say how the windows go or how to do it. It just says, here's the structure of the pattern. So one way for you to generate a pattern right now is think about an interaction that you had that was meaningful in nature. So you can do this right now. And now characterize it in such a way that you could imagine many such examples of it happening. And each example would be at least a little different from the others, but you wouldn't have a problem recognizing, oh yeah, that's what I mean, and oh, that's what I mean. Oh yeah, that's what I mean too. And they all have something different about them. And if possible, in describing your interaction, include a verb of what you're doing and a noun for the nature that you're doing it with. And you might, put a preposition in there perhaps. And now at that point, you probably have an interaction pattern. So here's one. I call it watching the sunset. Watching is what we're doing, the verb, and sunset is the nature noun and a preposition. Watching the sunset, it can happen on a mountaintop, it can happen at the ocean, it can happen all in various places in the city through a window. I mean, this is a beautiful experience of being human, is watching the sunset. And potentially it's not just us that watch sunsets and sunrises. Many animals do as well. So let me go through some patterns, and there's hiking of tree, of course. It's lovely, and you can have different sized trees, different people. Every time is different. you can put your cheek to the tree, you can put your forehead to the tree, just beautiful. And I want now to also speak about some of the ontogenetic and phylogenetic significance of some of these patterns. So lying on Earth for ontogenetic, this is from a study my lab did in Fiddleheads Forest Preschool here in Seattle. We did an observational study and we took video, kind of grounded in a year worth of video data, and then we analyzed the videos. So this is a child, she had just had an argument with a close friend of hers, and she was very, very upset. And in this video, then she goes and she lies on the ground, and she lies there for a couple minutes. And then she gets up, she's recentered herself, there's self-regulation, and she's now going to other friends and re-engaging with other people. This is such a beautiful, it's such a lying on ground. It's not simply like you're just tired and that's all that's happening. There's this amazing connection and ways in which the earth supports us and grounds us, both literally and in terms of our social relationships. Again, think about relationality, that I'm the opposite of domination. You lie on ground, it helps you re-engage relationally with someone that where there's been a substantive disagreement. This is also teaching kids how to engage with disagreements, that you're not trying to prevent disagreements, you're trying to help people navigate. And this is part of relationality, is how, and this was talked about this morning across some of your talks and questions, is how do we engage with people who have different ideas? And what I'm highlighting is interaction with nature. Here's a case in point, is allowing for that relationality to emerge. I love these, falling on ground. It looks so simple. Right? And it's so powerful. This is as kids, we need to learn how to fall on ground, and you know, you kind of roll and twist and you don't get hurt. You learn how to fall and not get hurt. You learn how to take care of yourself. Um, it's and you learn how not to fall too. You can trip and then catch yourself. But if you don't learn how to do this, when the children become adults, and you can imagine conservationists being effective in like bringing a beautiful park and creating conservation easements and access to these trails with, um, but if children, as they come of age, if they don't know how to fall, they will not feel comfortable being out on trails. Um, there's more to say there. I can come back to that if you want, but it's there will um, if people are not comfortable, if they don't have the skill set to be interacting with more than urban life, more wild nature, conservationists may be effective in establishing it, but it won't get used. If it doesn't get used, basically it will, that land, that relatively more wild space, it's going to get developed. There are a lot of good uses. Land is at a premium in urban areas. It's going to get used. So one needs to argue. And this is a very basic way of speaking about interaction as so critical for our grounding. Another story on this one. Okay, the girl who's standing and looking at the boy, uh, they've just in the middle of a disagreement, and the girl is really laying in to the boy and just saying you and she had really good reasons, and the boy knew that he was kind of in the wrong here. Um, what I want to offer just an interpretation of this. The boy is able to handle this. He's able to stay grounded, listen, and give ground in to the critique that's being leveled at him. He's got two things working that has his back. He's got his buddy there to his left, and that's wonderful. That's the social part. And what I'm suggesting as well is that he's got the tree. He's got the tree at his back. The tree has his back, and we know trees are just powerful sources of energy. And it's just like it's right there. So we can speak metaphysically about trees, we can try to make claims or whatever. All I'm saying here is that if we can enact these patterns, if we can create conditions where people can enact them, then we can make metaphysical arguments, but it doesn't, they're not critical to the psychology of relationality that I'm trying to develop here. Then interacting with relatively wild nature is increasing the relationality here. And it needs to be of a certain size. I don't think if this was just a little sapling that's been planted, I don't think it would be effective in the same way. So again, somewhat wild, a rewilding program here. Lying on raised edge on or by nature. I could call it lying on old growth, fallen trees. But you'll see in a moment why I want patterns, interaction patterns can be characterized at many different levels, and there's no right or wrong answer. The issue is what work do you want the pattern to do? If all I was wanting you to do is focus on the old growth and how you can just like, it's just so beautiful. It's just like you, especially the person on the left, she's just like snuggling in. You just feel her body connected so beautifully to the old growth and the undulations of it. If that's all you're focused on, then we could call this something else, but I want to do other work with this. Whoops, sorry. Um, it's because it's the same pattern lying on a raised edge here, but now this is a classic case of biophilic design. But it's more domestic. Once you understand the pattern in a wild sense, you can say, oh, okay, I can work with this pattern. I can build, I can design cities. I can design buildings and enact this pattern. And all I'm highlighting is same pattern, but it's not as deep, it's not as relational, but it's still beautiful, right? So it's not like critiquing one or the other. It's just recognizing from the wild to the more domestic. And then I took this photo in Pioneer Square in Seattle. It's a homeless person, and he's lying on a raised edge. Um, I don't know if this is what the designers had in mind, but it sure is better than lying on the street. So once you understand this pattern and how it can be used in different ways, there's mm, just a lot of potential. I've got a couple more slides on patterns. This is so many edges of nature. I mean, this is a very high abstract pattern, and you'll see why I'm characterizing. One is just edges in pathways, and these are beautiful, and you create them. On the other extreme, uh, this is on the west buttress of Denali, and I've been solo up here several times, and I think this is at about 16,500 feet. It's the wildest edge of nature I've been on. It's so powerful in my psyche. It's just deep. The experiences that I've had, particularly on this ridgeline, it's a classic ridgeline, but um, just enacting, walking an edge. Once you understand that pattern, and then I can go into Seattle, for example, there's ridge lines where in the city, and then you can just say, wow, can I create can I keep open that ridge line, at least in places where you get the long view? So beautiful. That's using the pattern for design. Of course, edges of water and land and beaches and how beautiful those are. Once you understand the wild pattern here, this is Green Lake in Seattle, the most heavily used park. Beautiful pattern because they kept it open, public space, edge of water and land all the way around the lake. Again, just so beautiful. Um, so I'm trying to speak about the importance of domestic nature, yes, but also that the domestic and wild exist along a continuum. And this is very important because if you just think of wild like, oh, some pristine, I'm not talking about it out there in some way. Um, I'm speaking that there's a continuum and that part of the solution that we need to move toward is deepening our the type of nature that we can have interaction with from the baseline that we've been interacting with. And that base, because otherwise that baseline keeps shifting, it keeps diminishing. And what I'm suggesting is no, we not only is it, I mean, that it's possible to go the other direction. So yeah, being in the presence of wildlife, it can be pretty wild. And but the bald eagle here is in the Seattle area, then a butterfly in I think New York City, immersed in waterfall, a more wild form of it. But then even in the city, it's just so amazing. I mean, here's a child. I call this like opening to life. You know, it's the body. It's the body just opening. You can be in urban environments, hard rainfall. I mean, that's wildness too. Oh, if we open to it. So these are choices we can make. Soaking feet in water. This is a wild river with glacier runoff, and then this is a domestic version. Recognizing and being recognized by non-human others. This is a beautiful, beautiful pattern. I just love it. It's so much. It's just like, and this is like looking into the eyes of a bear, and the bear looks into your eyes. It's a moment out of time. More, somewhat domestic then with horses, of being able to see horse consciousness, and they're looking into your eyes. And then, of course, dogs, so beautiful, and very domestic, and they use their eyes. They co-evolved using their eyes, and we look into their eyes, and they look at back. The more than human others. I mean, this is some of you are speaking about trans-species psychology. I mean, here it is, and ways in which interaction patterns provide the language, the nature language to speak about what that interaction and relationality is about in both domestic again and relatively in more wild settings. Crossing water, this is me crossing because I'm trying to get to the other side. And then once you understand the pattern, it's like this is a beautiful crossing, and the girl is now needing to um, be be aware. I mean, I was thinking with David Glover's talk in ecological awareness earlier today. Uh, Part of what rewilding does is it increasingly makes us ecologically aware, and this girl needs to be. Otherwise, not because someone's going to yell at her, but because she'll fall in and she'll get wet, maybe get a little bit of hurt. So it's a beautiful, perfect design that is asking and requiring a sort of awareness. It's beautiful. And here's the last pattern I want to speak on before shifting my direction in the talk. And it's I've been talking some on ontogeny, but this is more kind of phylogeny when I think about it, moving away from settlement and the return, because I think of our hunter-gatherer life. If you're a hunter, you can go out for a day or 2 or 3 days, and the further out you go from your community, your camp, it's like the riskier it is. You need to be even more aware as you move out from settlement. And the same with gathering. When you go out and the further out you go, there's more risk, and there's more, in a sense, ecological awareness. So it's a beautiful pattern to enact. This is one where deep in the architecture of our, I mean, just deep in our beings is this enjoyment and thriving through moving out and coming back. The Burke-Gilman Trail in Seattle is like 30, 50 miles of a converted railroad. And even right in the heart of Seattle, you can enact this pattern out and back by walking, by bicycle riding, and so forth. And then I'm thinking, this is a slide I used to show, and what I would say about it is that I want this to be my old age. When I'm old, it could be worse, right? I mean, I want to be able to open the door, and maybe I can only go out 50 feet. I want to open the door and move away from whatever domicile I'm in, and feel that engagement with the world, with the relatively wild world. It will be wild compared to what I was. So I have had this in my mind for quite some time. Um, yeah, I'll share a story about this. Uh, Happened a couple years ago. It's got a harsh beginning and kind of maybe ending, but I'll just say it straight. I my brother, my older brother, died of cancer a couple years ago, and it came on quite quickly. And so I went out and visited him in Colorado, and we sat around talking for a couple days. And one of the things that surprised me, I knew he used to go out for a couple weeks at a time in Kings Canyon, and I knew he really loved it. But so much of the time he was talking about his trips, and I go, wow, the last time we'll see each other. And there he is. He's talking about his trips in the backcountry. And I did a lot of listening and appreciation. And then I thought of this slide. I thought of this pattern. And then the idea came to me, and I just knew. I just knew. I said, Ted, let's go for a walk. And he's this close to the end, and he's like, oh no, no, I can't do that. I'm not strong enough. But I knew he had enough life force for that. I said, no, let's do it. And he was resistant, and then all of a sudden he just lights up. He lights up and goes, okay, yeah, yeah, yes, yes. And and then he tells his wife, and his wife gets really upset and just says no, because she says, what are you going to go out there and you're going to die, or, I'm going to call the ambulance, right? And Ted said, no, I'm going to do this. And he got his old hiking boots out, and he got his walking sticks, and we opened the door and moved away from settlement. It was risky. This is risky. We moved into wildness, the subdivision, and some of the places hadn't been built yet. And he did a loop, and he led me. I'm following him, little brother, following older brother. He's walking very slowly, and he's leading the way on a loop, and gets me back home 20 minutes later. Um, that's this pattern. I wouldn't have gotten that if I didn't have interaction pattern and the nature language to help me understand what was possible. I thought it was for myself. I go, no, no, this is in relation. This is relational. That was the deepest. My brother and I had done many trips together. That we've done climbed Mount Shasta and so forth. That was the deepest time I had with him. So I think this is some of the power of an interaction pattern approach. It gives a nature language to speaking about both what's beautiful with the domestic, but always trying to push into sort of rewilding. So I've been developing this IP theory, and many other students have been joining me in this endeavor. There's we've used it in various studies, such as with Discovery Park, about 500-600 acres here in Seattle, and people were studies speaking to the importance of relatively wild spaces, even in urban areas. Published this with Terry Hardig, Living in Cities Naturally, and the importance of nature in urban spaces, but not just nature, but for the interaction move to happen, for the be able to interact with. I've worked with architects such as NBBJ in trying to bring this into the architectural setting. Just briefly, this is well, I'll do that. I'm running out of time. This is a really important piece. It's a study we did in Hong Kong. Collected video data of 54 children playing in two different kinds of nature environments. One relatively domestic, that's the sandbox. The sand was hauled in by a pickup truck and kind of put in there and had to be replenished. And the other was relatively wild nature. You can see just kids were swimming in, and young 2-year-olds even, with adult supervision, of course, in this creek. And we coded for interaction patterns and then examined those IPs that were domination IPs, killing insects or catching wild animals, and relational, cohabitating with wild animals and using water to find respite from nature. And we did this in these two environments. And in the relatively domestic areas, children engaged in more of domination interaction patterns. So here, for example, if we had time for the video, you'd see a child finding an ant in the sand and saying something like, I don't have completely in my head, but something like, oh, there's an ant, I'm going to kill it, I'm going to step on it. And he does. And he tries to kill the ant. And that's domination of human over nature in this domestic play area. And here it's a relatively wild area. It doesn't look wild because this rock is all painted, but it was in a pretty wild forested area. And in this example, if we in the 5-minute video, what you'd see is a child being a lot of insects, and of course dengue fever and stuff. You need to not get bitten, and so the child's saying shoo, 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 and then he sees a bug on the rock, and then beautiful language to the child saying, oh wow, a bug. And basically he's saying in a version of what I would call a be well and live free. There's plenty of space for the bug to live and for him to love. He doesn't need to like, oh, I'm going to kill it. Plenty of space, even as he's taking care of himself, right? So this is not a relationality that says, oh, I'm bunny rabbit. I love bunny rabbits. I'm going to cuddle them. This is a child taking care of himself in a relatively wild way, getting mosquitoes away and letting life flourish. And I just think it's beautiful. And that was the main finding that we were able to establish, is that relatively wild nature interacting with it was engaging in less dominating and more relational behaviors. And this is also, we found the other study we did at Fiddleheads was our first study. Actually, we found that the children's interactions with relatively wild nature was associated with more relational behavior. And we weren't able to establish the domestic part as well. So just very briefly, when I'm thinking about mechanisms by which interaction with relatively wild nature can lead away from domination to relation, I think it invites and sometimes demands respect. Um, it invites and sometimes requires symbiosis. If you're swimming in the ocean, you don't control the ocean. You need to be with it. The sunset, so much appreciation, awe, aliveness, and of course, engenders humility and all. All of us know being under the night sky, a million stars overhead. It's just we're both very small and very large at the same time as consciousness merges with something so deep and so vast. So as I move toward ending my presentation, I'd like to return to what I'd set up at the beginning, and I said that I'd suggest that if we rewild ourselves through interaction with relatively wild nature, that would renew space in our consciousness for being itself and for a form of awareness that is spacious, still, and alive. And I was connecting that to the Satchit Ananda. I mean, let's, recall this example of encountering the bear. And there's a moment where you look into his eyes, and this has been my experience at least, or you look into his eyes and you recognize bear consciousness, which is absolutely amazing. It's the other. I mean, when Paul Shepard talks about the other, and that we came of age with the animal other, and that other being of a wild form, and you recognize that and the bear consciousness, and you recognize that he's looking into your eyes. He's not looking at your feet. He's not looking to your side. He's looking into your eyes, and he's recognizing human consciousness, whatever that means from a bear's standpoint. Just profound. Um, And then you likely have found this so, if not with bears, I think through your own interactions with relatively wild nature, that there's a moment it's just out of time. Um, and little of the theme of our conference here is that through the reciprocity on the edge, the relative wildness, through that form of reciprocity, there's no thought, but there's very high awareness. That is, there's a moment in this example with the bear where, for me, all thinking stops. And the awareness, the consciousness is so high. It's so beautiful. It's a moment that I'm suggesting it's parting ways with time, space, and causality. And whether the one wants to take that at a metaphysical level or one wants to back it up simply as psychologists saying within consciousness, those ontological categories of time, space, and causality, they're gone. They're just gone. There's just this immense being with the other. And that experience can stay with one for a lifetime and shape who we are. So in conclusion, I'm suggesting that through interacting with relatively wild nature, we can counter environmental generational amnesia, we can reawaken relational ways of being, and open space in our consciousness for presence, for a form of awareness without thought. And it's spacious, it's still, it's alive, it's who we are. So thank you so much, and open this up for discussion.
Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for that really moving and wonderful talk. I'm really kind of blown away by even the impulse to study dominating versus relational interaction patterns in domesticated versus wild nature. I'm curious how you even kind of came up with the idea to look at those, to sort of compare those to arenas for patterns of domination and relationality. And then a second question that sort of rides on the coattails of that is, you spoke a little bit about what you think engenders more relational patterns of interaction in wild nature. What do you feel engenders kind of more dominating modes of interaction in domesticated nature? Is it because domesticated settings already are sort of intrinsically encode domination, like in the environmental setup, or is there another reason? So I know it's a bundle of questions, but
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, kind of the how I was coming up with the relational part. I mean, the first move was to be able to recognize that was the continuum between the domestic and wild. And I think it didn't that it seems obvious, of course, but it didn't come easy to me, because when I came of age academically, there was vigorous dialogue between wilderness, wildness, and the distinction between wildness and the domestic. And over the years, my experience has been that the wild, and I'm very careful to call it relatively wild, is has decreased so much that that debate is really no longer out there that I encounter in any meaningful way. And so the energy is turned to the city and the nature of nature in urban environments. What frustrated when I maybe first focused on this was in the Oakland Museum of Natural History, I think it was, at a meeting. I was trying to make the case for the importance of wildness in children's lives, and they really liked my idea and said it had no relevance to them in Oakland. And that's when I recognized that I needed to develop this account better. So you can see that deep in my presentation today, is really trying to help people feel how it's incremental, and wherever you are, you can take a type of interaction and rewild it. The relationality move is harder to explain. In some ways, it was an aha moment. And not only for me, it was Thea Weiss, who was at Fiddleheads, and she came back and started talking to me about the ideas. And we had been talking about them in ways, but she kind of crystallized it. And when I heard her say it, I go, okay, that's it. What is it about the city environment? That's just a great question. I'll need to sit with it more. I don't know if I've done that justice in my thinking. It's in some ways it's such a human constructed, controlled. In some ways, it moves us really far and quickly away from our evolutionary origins. And but it's also, I don't know how much work, it's such a provocative question, because I don't know how much work would happen at the environmental stimulus level, and how much of it is also tied to culture. And when we make the move from Paleolithic, Neolithic era, Jared Diamond makes this argument, others have many, that once we move to agriculture and have property and can settle and have increased populations, and all of a sudden there's social status and a hierarchy and accumulation of goods, and things change really fast in the last 5,000 years. But not every culture ended up with domination in their model, of course, right? And so but in today's world, that's what we're seeing so much of. And so we think all cultures are, but there's something at a cultural level. And I think many of you at CIS, I mean, you've worked that part out so much more carefully than I have. So I would probably, to the extent I want to make a cultural move, I would think I would draw on your work. To the extent, I mean, I'm trying to answer your question, what in the environment? I think it's a great question, and you helped me kind of frame it for thinking about. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Will had a question. I was going to let him go next. First of all, Peter, just a big word of gratitude. That was very profound and inspiring.
Oh,
And um, yeah, I feel very touched. And I really appreciate how you uh, begin and end with direct, intimate experience. I mean, there's so many systemic structural changes that we need, of course, political and economic and legal and on and on and on. And yet, none of that can happen, I think, without the direct experiential contact. Um, so, um, I have just a really basic practical question, given that the um, sort of therapeutic moves that you're encouraging are so countercultural today. Um, how do you help facilitate experiential rewilding? I mean, just very practically, what are some ways that you're, reaching out to people and groups and on to actually bring this into existence? Because, in a certain way, it's like, well, this, of course, this is the pathway, and yet it is so countercultural. It's just, I mean, I laugh because it's just so bizarre in a way, and yet it's quite a radical thing to do these days.
yeah. Um, yeah, another great question. Uh, just briefly, just a few different ways to handle it. One is to try to give voice and the academic grounding and the research to what is happening. So if you think of the different forest preschools that are, it's a burgeoning area and there's a lot of growth. Um, that's really important to support. And so people are doing it, but they don't know how amazing it is. I'm trying to help give some of the language for that. So that's the nature language part. There's a design component where I think I'm trying to get this into architecture and working with some students on that. And I have been. I think it's a hard way in because different disciplines are always within their own narrow field. They see things in a particular way, and it's so. Uh, but I've worked with architects and still am, and I think that's a really important area to be able to then have impact because you need to redesign cities that allow not only for nature, but for it's not just simply biophilic design with nature there, but it's designing these places so that the interactions are possible. So a fountain, for example, is it a beautiful European fountain that you just look at, or is it a fountain that kids can run alongside of and splash in and do those are different forms of interactions, vision, or is it more than vision? So that's on the design side. I think ecotherapists, I mean, it's what one does, and potentially, and Pat Hasbach, who is co-author on the Rediscovery of the Wild book and the Ecopsychology volume, she does a lot of rewilding and ecotherapy work, where still needing to stay within people's comfort zone, but the more she's able to get at the edge. I mean, and this conference is about the edges. So the edges, the edges are where the action is. It's like, where are people's edges and get them to edges, literally, right? And this is here's your assignment for the week, and come back to me and let's talk. And once you start doing that, I think what Pat showed is people come back with very rich dialogue and experiences that they again can do it. They can do the work. And so it's really just, Will, what you just highlighted is that the it builds on that intimate connection. And without that intimate connection, you basically have someone sitting in your office and you're just kind of abstracting. So the same challenge, obviously with teaching in my classes at UW, it's very academic, and I don't probably do enough of get out. So I'm gonna do more of that now. And finally, how to integrate this, and this goes back to big and this goes back to Von Wilkins' critique maybe of the journal, and I'm coming back to, is that for me, some of the things that are not counterculture still need to be integrated into our eco-psychology. And that's me saying on a developmental level, when I'm saying anthropocentric reasoning is good, just can we move it to bios? Can we embed the self within a larger self, but not try to tell someone that their self doesn't count? And the same with this um, form of using nature for our strengthening ourselves and our physical well-being and our mental well-being. There's a lot of ways that that language can do work for people and get them to start interacting and engaging nature. It may not be in the way that we think is the fullest, and it isn't. But it's a movement, and if we only frame things in language that is kind of the purity test of what we think is the counterculture or the deepest way of moving, I think we'll lose. Um, and we'll in effect be doing a type of othering, and with a litmus test. So that's why I think for the Journal of Ecopsychology, I'm really aiming for an umbrella that allows for the very dialogue that we're having here in happening within a printed medium.
That's great. Thank you.
I want to just check back in with the in-person participants. Does anyone have a question here? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Devin. I'm also really interested in this idea of domination versus relational patterns, specifically how these modes of domination come out more so in domestic spaces. What it kind of reminds me of is the idea behind the alpha wolf. I forgot who it was exactly, but this animal behavior specialist basically debunked that myth about the alpha wolf, saying that those behaviors of domination really only come out in confinement, when wolves are in confinement. So I'm wondering if that can apply to humans as well, and the behavior that you saw with children. Is it that domination really comes out when we're having this like feeling of confinement? Yeah, that's kind of what I'm curious about.
Yeah, great setup to the question too. And um, I don't have a really quick answer to that. I think I've been circling around these sorts of questions, but I don't know if I've quite asked it in the way. You can see me circling around it when I show the picture of us being in a prison cell or something. And uh, I just think all of us would be hugely challenged. Maybe some of us come out as saints, but many of us, I don't think we would do so well. And so that's putting a lot on the environment. And so, yeah, there's a way in which then things like crowding, and you can see that with animals, and there is a long history with animal behavior of being able to show things like crowding, density, and so forth, leading to aggression and ill health. So some of the work, yeah, happens that way. I think the other important point you're highlighting is that when we are looking across species and or doing an evolutionary move for our own species, um, cooperation is a deep sense and part of the origins of who we are. Uh, and I think often it's a misreading of Paleolithic history, of human history, of thinking that, and it's often cast that way when you talk about, oh, people are being tribal or something, as if it's warfaring. And I think that tribal warfaring motif, it goes back in parts of the Neolithic area, agricultural times in the last 5,000 years. But if you look at most accounts that I've seen, I mean, Elizabeth Marshall Thomas in her book, The Old Way, and she's talking about relationships of the San in the 1950s as an example of our earlier history, say 100,000 years ago. What you see is no warfare. It's not, there's no organization for at that level. Very little, and deep relationality and cooperation. And in that sense, cooperation is a deep part of who we are. And in some sense, it's very helpful, hopeful in this way. And I take because um, when things are a deep part of revolutionary history, I think we can reclaim them in an easier way than something that's not. And so I think it's right there within us. And we have 5,000 years or so of culture, some culture that has really distorted things.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I like that idea of really trying to denaturalize domination in not only other species, but humanity itself. Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Do we want to take one more online question? And
I actually had just told them to contact him because I figured we were running out of time.
oh, you're right. Okay, so thank you so much, Peter. And
It's a pleasure.
we're going to take a 10-minute break now. We'll come back at 2:50 and we'll continue. Thank you.